My name is Elmer Jones, 28 years old. Before my younger brother was born, I remember a version of my life that feels almost unreal now, like a dream. I'm never quite sure actually happened. In those early years, my parents looked at me as if I mattered. They took me to the park on Saturday mornings, lifting me onto the swings and pushing me higher, while I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. They clapped when I climbed the jungle gym, even though I was clumsy and slow, and at night my mother read bedtime stories in ridiculous voices that made me beg her to read just one more chapter. My crayon drawings were taped proudly to the fridge, crooked and overlapping like evidence that I was worth noticing. I didn't have to earn their attention back then. It was just there. Then Liam was born, and everything shifted so quietly that at first I told myself I was imagining it. At the beginning, I understood. Babies cry. Babies need to be fed and held and rocked to sleep. I waited patiently, believing things would go back to normal once he grew older. But they didn't. As Liam grew, the attention didn't balance out. It narrowed, funneling entirely toward him until it felt like there was no space left for me at all. He wasn't just the baby of the family, he became the center of it. My parents praised him endlessly. Every word he spoke was clever, every scribble amazing, every ordinary milestone treated like a miracle. Meanwhile, I learned how to exist quietly, how to shrink myself so I wouldn't be in the way. They didn't yell at me. They didn't punish me more than necessary. That almost made it worse. I wasn't rejected, I was ignored. I still remember my 10th birthday with painful clarity. For weeks, I had hinted that I wanted a bicycle. I cut pictures out of magazines and left them on the kitchen counter, pretending I'd forgotten they were there. I imagined myself riding through the neighborhood, hair flying, finally able to keep up with the other kids. When my birthday came, I tore into the wrapping paper with my heart racing, only to find clothes and books neatly stacked inside the boxes. I forced a smile and thanked my parents, telling myself it was fine. When I asked about the bike, they said it was too expensive. I nodded and swallowed the lump in my throat, convincing myself that money was tight and that I should be grateful. 2 weeks later, I came home from school and saw Liam in the driveway, pedaling a brand new bike in wide, triumphant circles. He hadn't asked for one. It was just a surprise. When I asked why he got a bike and I didn't, my parents barely looked up. Liam needs more exercise, they said. You're fine without one. I wasn't fine. I felt invisible. That moment wasn't an exception. It was a preview. When I made the honor roll in middle school, I brought the certificate home and held it out like an offering. My mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, Elmer," before returning to the television. When Liam got a B+ on a single math test, they took us out to dinner to celebrate. I sat there quietly watching them gush over him while something bitter settled in my chest. I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. I just knew that whatever it was, I couldn't fix it. As we got older, the imbalance grew sharper. When I was 16, I got my first part-time job at a local bookstore. I loved it more than I expected. Earning my own money made me feel capable, like I had some control over my future. I started saving for college, dreaming about leaving home and finally living without constantly measuring myself against my brother. That sense of independence didn't last long. Liam, who was 13 at the time, complained that it wasn't fair I had spending money and he didn't. Instead of telling him to wait his turn, my parents told me I needed to give him half my paycheck. Half. I thought they were joking. When I realized they weren't, I argued, my voice shaking as I tried to explain how unfair it was. They shut me down immediately. "He's your brother," they said. "You should want to help him." When I tried to refuse, they threatened to make me quit the job entirely. So I gave in. Every month I handed over money I had worked hard for, while Liam spent it on video games and junk food, grinning like it was his right. It wasn't just money. Liam took my clothes without asking, used my electronics, and later, after I got my license, borrowed my car as if it belonged to him. If I complained, my parents scolded me for being selfish. "You should be happy to share," they said. They never taught him to respect boundaries because in their eyes, he didn't need to. He could do no wrong. Looking back, I don't even fully blame Liam. He was raised to believe the world would always bend for him. Still, that knowledge didn't make the hurt disappear. Every dismissal, every excuse chipped away at me until I started wondering if I really was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I just wasn't enough. So I tried harder. I got straight A's, joined extracurriculars, volunteered on weekends, anything I thought might finally make them see me. It never worked. My achievements were met with polite indifference, while Liam's smallest successes were celebrated like triumphs. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was angry at my parents for their favoritism at Liam, for benefiting from it, and at myself for still wanting their approval. By the time I was 18 and preparing to leave for college, I had accepted a painful truth: my family wasn't going to change. Their favoritism wasn't a phase, it was the foundation of our dynamic. I stopped trying to impress them and focused on getting out, telling myself that distance would dull the ache. Even then, a part of me carried the little girl who never got her bike, still hoping someone would notice. I didn't know it yet, but those early wounds were shaping everything: how I loved, how I trusted, and how fiercely I guarded my independence. And one day, when I thought I had finally built a life untouched by their choices, they would reach for control again, using the last thing they thought could scare me. College was supposed to be my escape, the clean line that separated who I had been in my parents' house from who I could become on my own. When the acceptance letter arrived, I stared at it for a long time before showing anyone, letting myself imagine, just for a moment, that this might finally be the thing that made my parents proud. I had worked for it, juggling school extracurriculars, volunteering, and my part-time job at the bookstore. I even earned a partial scholarship enough that I wouldn't have to rely on my parents for much financial help. It felt like proof that I could stand on my own. When I handed my mom the letter, she barely reacted. She skimmed it, nodded once, and said, "That's nice, Elmer," before turning back to her crossword. My dad muttered a distracted, "Good for you," from the couch, without taking his eyes off the TV. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something more: questions, excitement, pride, but nothing came. Whatever fragile hope I had evaporated right there in the living room. A few years later, when Liam got into a local community college, my parents threw him a party. Catering decorations, relatives filling the house, all of them, congratulating him as if he'd just been accepted into some elite university. I watched from the corner, a plastic cup in my hand, feeling like a ghost in my own family. It wasn't the school that bothered me. It was the contrast. It always was. I buried myself in college life. I took on a second job to help cover expenses and spent as little time at home as possible. That's when photography found me. I'd always liked taking pictures, but in college it became something more an anchor. Through the lens, I felt in control. I could frame the world the way I wanted, decide what mattered enough to be seen. My photography class quickly became the highlight of my week, and my professor noticed. He encouraged me to enter local competitions and suggested I invest in a better camera if I was serious about it. So I made a plan. I picked up extra shifts, skipped coffee runs, turned down nights out with friends. I created a budget and tracked every dollar. I stashed the cash in my old desk drawer at my parents' house during winter break, counting it over and over like a ritual. The camera wasn't just equipment, it was proof that something I loved could belong to me. When I went to check the money one afternoon, my stomach dropped. The stack was thinner. I counted again, then again, hoping I'd miscalculated. I hadn't. A large chunk was gone. I already knew who had taken it. When I confronted Liam, he didn't even pretend to feel guilty. "Yeah, I took some," he said with a shrug. He told me he needed it for a new gaming console and figured I wouldn't mind. My parents rushed in before I could even respond. "It's not like he stole it," my mom said. "He's your brother. You should want to help him." My dad added that I could always save up again, like the months of sacrifice meant nothing. I was shaking. I demanded that Liam return the console and pay me back. My parents refused to support me. Instead, they blamed me for leaving the money where he could find it. "You should have hidden it better," they said, as if trusting my own family was a mistake I should have known better than to make. That was the moment something in me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of favoritism, the constant dismissal, the way they always chose Liam without hesitation. I realized there was nothing I could do to change them. No achievement, no sacrifice, no amount of patience would ever be enough. After that, I pulled away. I stopped visiting on weekends. I kept conversations short and superficial. My parents accused me of changing, of thinking I was better than them. Liam smirked and told me I was just jealous because he was the favorite. He wasn't wrong about the jealousy, but it wasn't what he thought. I wasn't jealous of his games or the attention. I was jealous of the love he got so effortlessly. So I focused on building a life far from their orbit. I stayed on campus, worked longer hours, and poured myself into photography. The more distance I created, the lighter I felt. It hurt to accept that my family would never be what I needed, but that acceptance gave me something else in return: freedom. and with it, the determination to never let anyone take from me the way they always had. Creating distance from my family didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, almost accidental at first, like drifting away from a shoreline you didn't realize you were leaving. I answered fewer calls. I stopped driving home for random weekends. When holidays came around, I suddenly had extra shifts at work or group projects that couldn't be postponed. Each excuse felt flimsy, but no one ever pushed hard enough to call me out on it. In some ways, that hurt more than confrontation would have. It confirmed what I already suspected I was easy to let go of. When I did show up, I kept my guard up. Conversations stayed shallow. I didn't share details about my life, my goals, or my frustrations. My parents noticed, of course. They always do when control starts slipping. "You've changed," my mom said one afternoon, her tone sharp with accusation. "You think you're too good for us now." I wanted to laugh at the irony of it. Wanting basic respect apparently made me arrogant. Liam, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the shift. He'd make comments under his breath just loud enough for me to hear. Once during a rare family dinner, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You're just jealous," he said. "You always have been." My parents didn't correct him. They never did. Their silence felt like agreement. By then I had learned something important: distance didn't magically heal old wounds. It just stopped new ones from forming. The scars were still there, shaping how I interacted with people, how quickly I shut down when I felt dismissed, how fiercely independent I'd become. I didn't ask for help easily. I didn't trust praise. Compliments made me uncomfortable, like they were a test I hadn't studied for. That's around the time Noah came into my life. We met in a way that felt almost too ordinary to matter mutual friends, a casual conversation that turned into a long walk and then another. What stood out about Noah wasn't some grand gesture or dramatic spark. It was how steady he was. He listened without interrupting. When I talked about my work or my photography, he paid attention, asked questions, remembered details. At first, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop for the moment when his interest would fade or turn conditional. It didn't. As we grew closer, I told him about my family in pieces, never all at once. The favoritism, the money, the way I always felt like I was asking for too much just by existing. Noah didn't rush to fix it or offer platitudes. He just listened. Sometimes he'd shake his head slowly and say, "That's not okay," in a way that made me feel seen instead of dramatic. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that out loud. Our relationship became the safest place in my life, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. When we argued, we talked it through. When I pulled back emotionally, he noticed, but instead of accusing me, he asked what I needed. Being with him showed me how abnormal my family dynamic had been, how much I'd normalized being overlooked. By the time Noah proposed, I had built a life that felt solid, a career I was proud of, passions that belonged to me, a partner who treated me like I mattered without keeping score. When he got down on one knee, my first feeling wasn't fear, it was joy, the kind that makes your chest ache. The dread came later. Almost immediately after we announced our engagement, my thoughts turned to my parents and Liam. The idea of involving them in something so personal made my stomach knot. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself I'd deal with it when I had to. But I knew my parents. I knew silence wouldn't last. The call came sooner than I expected. My mom's voice was cheerful at first, overly sweet, asking about the wedding plans, the venue, the date. I could hear the question coming before she asked it. So she said lightly, "When should we expect our invitations?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of years press down on my chest. "Mom," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't think it's a good idea for you, Dad, or Liam to come to the wedding." The silence on the other end was sharp and cold. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "We're your family." I tried to explain. I told her I wanted the wedding to be about love and support, not tension and old wounds. I brought up the favoritism, the way it had affected me, the distance that existed for a reason. I wasn't attacking her, I was explaining myself, but she didn't hear it that way. "You're being selfish," she said. "You're punishing us for things that happened years ago. Liam is devastated." That word devastated caught me off guard. When I asked what she meant, she sighed impatiently. "He thought he'd be part of your big day," she said. "He's been telling everyone he'd be your best man." I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that surprised even me. I hadn't spoken to my brother properly in years, and somehow he'd decided he was entitled to a central role in my wedding. When I pointed that out, my mom brushed it aside. "He's your brother," she said. "Of course he assumed you'd want him there." I ended the call soon after, my hands shaking. My dad called later, his tone harsher, more aggressive. He accused me of tearing the family apart, of letting old grudges ruin what should be a happy time. He said they were willing to forgive my coldness over the years, if I just invited them. Forgive me. The manipulation was so familiar, it almost felt comforting in its predictability. Then the text from Liam started. Angry, self-pitying, cruel. He rewrote our entire childhood in a few paragraphs, painting himself as the victim and me as the bitter sister who couldn't stand to see him happy. Reading them, I realized something chilling. In his version of events, I had never been wronged. I had simply failed to accept my place. When my parents finally threatened to cut me out of their will if I didn't comply, I expected to feel scared. Instead, I felt calm. That threat might have worked once. It didn't anymore. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their approval. And for the first time, I understood that keeping my distance wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. Noah stood by me through all of it, steady as ever. When I told him my decision, he nodded and said, "This is your day. You don't owe them anything." Hearing that out loud felt like permission I'd never been given before. Still, as the wedding planning moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. My family had never respected my boundaries before. There was no reason to believe they would start now. Once the threat about the will was out in the open, the tone of every interaction shifted. My parents stopped pretending this was about hurt feelings or family togetherness. It became about leverage, about consequences, about reminding me one last time that they believed they still had power over me. My mom called again 2 days later, her voice controlled in that way I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. "Your father and I have talked," she said. "We don't understand why you're doing this, but we're willing to put everything behind us. All of it. If you invite us and Liam to the wedding." She paused deliberately. "If you don't, then don't expect to be included in our future. We have to think about what's fair." Fair. The word almost made me laugh. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply told her no, not this time, not ever again. The line went dead after that, and for a moment I just sat there staring at my phone, waiting for the familiar rush of guilt to flood in. It didn't. What I felt instead was something close to grief, not for what I was losing, but for what I had never really had. Liam escalated next. He left a voicemail so long I had to listen to it in sections. His voice bounced between anger and wounded pride, accusing me of humiliating him, of trying to make myself feel important by excluding him. "You've always needed to be the victim," he said. "This is just another way for you to get attention." Hearing him talk so confident and so wrong made my hands tremble. He genuinely believed that I owed him access to my life simply because we shared blood. Noah saw the toll it was taking, even when I tried to hide it. One night, as we sat surrounded by venue brochures and half-finished to-do lists, he gently took my hands and said, "We don't have to let this ruin our day." That was when we made the decision to protect ourselves instead of hoping for the best. We hired security for the venue and password-protected every vendor account. It felt surreal, like preparing for a threat I had spent my whole life pretending didn't exist. Despite everything, planning the wedding itself was unexpectedly joyful. Choosing the venue, tasting cakes, practicing our first dance in the living room, while laughing at our own mistakes, it reminded me why this mattered. This wasn't about my parents or my brother. It was about the life Noah and I were choosing together. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange mix of excitement and tension. I got ready with my bridesmaids in a sunlit room at the venue, the air buzzing with laughter and nervous energy. For a few hours, I almost forgot about my family entirely. I focused on the weight of the dress, the curl of my hair, the sound of my friends teasing me into smiling. Then Emily, my maid of honor, slipped back into the room, her face pale. "Elmer," she whispered, glancing toward the door, "your family is here." My heart dropped. Here I asked, already knowing what that meant. She nodded. My parents and Liam had shown up dressed like honored guests, insisting they were there to support me, arguing with security at the entrance. For a brief, foolish second, I considered going out there myself, confronting them, ending it once and for all. Then I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at the woman I had fought so hard to become. "No," I said quietly. "Let security handle it." Waiting was the hardest part. I could hear raised voices in the distance, couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew them by heart. When Emily came back to tell me they'd been escorted off the property, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and something like closure all tangled together. As I stood at the end of the aisle, bouquet clutched in my hands, all of that faded. The music started. I saw Noah waiting for me, his expression open and full of love, and everything else became background noise. Whatever my family tried to take from me, this moment was mine. The moment I reached the altar, the world narrowed to just Noah and me. The tension that had followed me all morning slipped away as he took my hands, grounding me in the present. We had written our own vows, and as I spoke mine, my voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had led me there. I promised him honesty, partnership, and a life built on mutual respect. When it was his turn, he talked about my resilience, about how I'd taught him what strength really looked like. I saw friends wiping their eyes in the crowd, and for once I didn't feel embarrassed by being seen. The ceremony flowed into a reception filled with laughter, music, and warmth. Noah's family embraced me like I had always belonged, his mother pulling me into a hug and telling me how proud she was of us. Hearing that proud hit harder than I expected. It was a simple word, but it carried a tenderness I'd been missing my entire life. For the first time, I let myself accept it without suspicion. As the night unfolded, I realized something quietly profound. The absence of my parents and Liam hadn't left a hole in the celebration. It had created space, space for joy, space for people who genuinely wanted to be there. Emily's speech captured it perfectly. She spoke about watching me learn to choose myself, about how strength isn't loud or aggressive, it's knowing when to walk away. Her words settled into me like a benediction. Our honeymoon was a much-needed exhale. 2 weeks in a small coastal town where the days were slow and the nights even slower. We walked along the beach, talked about nothing and everything, and let the noise of the past fade into the background. One evening, as the sun dipped into the water, Noah asked the question we'd both been avoiding. What do you want to do about your family? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I don't think I want to go back, I said finally. Saying it out loud felt heavy, but also honest. Noah nodded, his hand warm in mine. Whatever you decide, he said, I'm with you. When we returned home, I created the distance I knew I needed. I blocked numbers, stepped away from social media. It wasn't about punishment, it was about peace. Liam sent an email a few weeks later claiming he'd been reflecting and wanted to make amends. He mentioned the money he'd taken, the ways he'd hurt me. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part remembered how easily apologies had been weaponized in my family. I replied politely, keeping my boundaries intact. My parents never reached out directly. Instead, they told their version of the story through relatives, painting me as unstable, ungrateful, dramatic. It hurt, but it didn't surprise me. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered. Life settled into a rhythm that felt safe. Noah and I built a home filled with warmth and honesty. My photography flourished. I learned how to rest without guilt, how to accept love without bracing for loss. The past didn't disappear, but it lost its power over me. I don't know what the future holds, or whether my family will ever truly change. What I do know is this family isn't defined by obligation or blood. It's defined by respect, care, and the choice to show up. And for the first time in my life, I am surrounded by people who choose me back.